Have you ever wondered how artisanal breads are made? Well, on today's video, we are going to cover the step-by-step process to create your own beautiful, delicious sourdough bread. First step that we're going to do is combine the flour and the water, which is called the autolyse phase of making bread. Autolyse, spelled A-U-T-O-L-Y-S-E, is basically a process where the flour and the water combined, it sits for about 3 hours and it sort of develops chemically the characteristics that you want in bread. I'm going to give you two types of measurements: the grams for those of you that have a digital scale, and then I convert it into cups for those of you who don't. We start off with 800 grams of flour. So 800 grams or 5.5 cups. The next ingredient is water, and you're going to use room temperature to warm water. I don't like using cold water. I think it reacts differently if you use warmer water. So I have warm water, 460 grams. If you don't have a digital scale, it actually measures, the conversion is 2 cups of water. So you have 5.5 cups of flour, 2 cups of water, and continue to mix. You may ask, how long do I need to mix it for? It's really until it's all combined and that you have this like elastic, sticky, kind of doughy type of texture. At this point, your flour and water mixture should have been sitting for about 3 hours, covered with plastic wrap. You could remove the plastic wrap and you could, with your fingers, touch it, and it should have a very dough-like consistency. Somewhat sticky, but definitely the feeling of dough. Next step is called, that we're going to be doing, is called the leaven step, and that's spelled L-E-V-A-I-N. It's a French word. It's an agent that you add to the dough at this point, which helps the dough rise. Our agent is going to be our starter that we've been working on for the past week. If you take a look at it, it should have a vinegary smell. It should be bubbly. It should be thick, and this particular one I've had sort of hanging out by the oven. I had the oven on, and the warmth of the oven has allowed it to rise. So we're going to be adding this to our dough, which is basically our water and our flour, and we're going to be adding our starter. How much starter? If you're using a digital scale, it's about 320 grams. If you don't have a digital scale, it's going to be 1.5 cups. So I'm just going to measure 1.5 cups of the starter. So you might ask, now what am I going to do with the rest of my starter? Well, if you're planning on baking more bread, and you probably will want to after this project is completed, you can continue adding flour and water to this, and it will continue growing your starter. So I would not necessarily discard this, or at least wait till you finish your finished product, and you're going to want to use more. Okay, so now you have your starter, your sourdough starter, on top of your flour water mixture, and with your hand you're going to use it to just kind of blend it. I like to wet my hand because, and it's going to have a very strange feeling, but the way I'm wetting it, I'm kind of going around the sides, and with my fingers I'm combining the starter into the dough. I'm using one hand to do that and the other hand to hold the bowl. What I'm going to do now, because it's a little too sticky, I'm just going to kind of wet my hand a little more and continue doing that. You want to mix your starter and your dough until it's well combined for about 2 to 3 minutes. This part is very important because it's going to be what actually makes the dough rise. Once your sourdough starter is combined into your dough, you are going to, okay, that's good. You're going to cover it, and you're going to let it sit for another 30 minutes. At this point, you have allowed your sourdough starter and your dough mixture to have rested for about 30 minutes. The next step we're going to do is we're going to be adding our salt. I like using, I'll give you a close-up, sea salt, fine sea salt. If you don't have fine sea salt, you can use any type of salt. Table salt is fine. Between 10 to, well, I would say 15 to 20 grams of salt. If you don't have a digital scale, we're going to measure it in a tablespoon. It's 1 tablespoon of salt. So we're going to just pour in the salt, measure it, and we're going to sort of evenly sprinkle it on top of the dough surface. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create like a dimpling effect. We're going to just poke into the dough with our fingers to kind of get the salt inside. And you can really start feeling this texture of the dough. It really starts feeling like dough at this point. And you'll see it's starting to pull away from the bowl. Less stickier, a little more dough-like. And it definitely smells like bread dough. You probably have to do this for about 5 minutes to mix it up, make sure the salt's combined. But you're not really kneading the dough, you're just sort of gently using your fingers in the bowl to mix it. You're going to cover it and let it rest for another 30 minutes. Okay, the next step that we're going to do is the folding step. So your starter, your dough, and your salt have been resting in the bowl for the past 30 minutes. We're going to be turning out your dough onto the table, but before we do that, we're going to lightly mist the surface of the table. Notice that we're not using any flour, we're using water only, okay? If you don't have a mister or a spray bottle, you could just use your hand with some water. The idea is that you want to have a very light, sort of wet surface that you can put the dough onto and that would prevent it from sticking. So I'm just gonna lightly mist the surface of the table, and I'm also using a bench scraper, and I'm gonna lightly mist that. And that's, again, the water is gonna prevent everything from sticking. And then I'm just gonna turn the dough onto the table, and I'm gonna just let it sort of stretch and release itself. Maybe I'll help it a little bit with my hand from the bowl onto the table. And it's going to be pretty sticky at this point, but it's fine. And if your hands seem to get a little sticky, you can also wet your hands a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold the dough, and it's going to be this sticky sort of mass that you're going to just stretch out on the table like so. And you're going to use the scraper, and we're going to just kind of create like a rectangular shape. It's almost like pizza, very, very wet pizza dough. But it's all in the process in making this dough that makes it so delicious and the texture so good. Okay, so you stretch it out, and if it sticks, again, you're going to use water. If you don't have a spray bottle, you can have a bowl of water next to your side. And we're going to just fold in half. And then you're going to pick up the other side and fold it in half again. And it kind of just blobs and moves into its own shape. And we're going to pick it up, stretch it, and fold it again. That's basically it. We're going to pick it up. Again, if you have a bench scraper, it'll be very handy, helpful. You're going to pick it up and you're going to put it back into the bowl, and that's it. And that will sit now for another 30 to 45 minutes until we move on to the next step. Okay, next step, we're laminating our dough. The way we're going to do this is we're going to get a very little bit of flour, and we're going to just put a little bit of flour on the edge of the bowl. The reason for that is that when we turn the dough, the flour is going to hopefully help release the dough onto the table. We're also going to take a little bit of flour, a handful, and sprinkle it. Not too much. You don't want to add a lot of flour into this. Notice we haven't added any flour up until this point. And we're going to roll the dough out onto the table. And it's just going to release itself from the bowl. Okay. And we're going to just use a tiny bit of flour, and we're going to, if we have the bench scraper, we're going to kind of bring some flour around into the dough and under it. And again, this is the only time we're adding flour, but you need to add just a very, very little, because most of the dough is really, it's very hydrated. There's a lot of water, and you want to keep it that way. But this little bit of flour will help it from sticking. Okay? And we're going to be laminating the dough, and what that means is just stretching it out as far as possible. Similar to the step we did prior to this, but if it sticks, use your scraper, add just a little bit of flour, but you want to just stretch it. Think of pizza, making some kind of pizza, but stretching it right onto the table surface. You're going to stretch it as far as you can, and it's pretty flexible, this dough. You'll notice it's not really tearing, it's not ripping. And that's what you want. But you want to stretch it from pulling it from the middle underneath and really stretching it out as far out as you can possibly stretch it without tearing it. See, I got a little hole there, that's fine. And we're scraping if you can. Okay. And it may stick to the surface of the table. If it does, not a big deal. You could just use a spatula or your bench scraper to release it. Just like I'm not putting flour onto the dough, I'm putting it around it, you notice, okay? So, now what we're gonna do is just fold it in half. As you fold it in half, you're gonna pat it down gently. You might notice the little air bubbles. Those you want to sort of pop. And then you're folding it in half. See, there's an air bubble there. And then you're gonna fold it upwards. Just like that. So it's almost like a roll. And you're gonna pat it down. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna fold it this way, to the side. Using your scraper, just to get it started. You're gonna fold it in half. And we're going to fold the other side. Just like that. And then we're going to fold it once more. Now you have this loaf, and we're going to sort of tuck in the sides a little bit. And you can see that there's a lot of air in this. That's exactly what you want. So now what we're going to do, we're going to transfer this to a clean bowl, cover it, and let it rest for another 30 minutes. Okay, 30 minutes has passed. The dough has been resting, and now we're going to go into the next step, which is the folding and stretching step. I'm going to put my dough out on the table. And before I go further, I'm going to divide this into half. Try to get two somewhat even loaves. And I'm going to transfer each loaf into these glass Pyrex container. You can do it into a bowl, it doesn't really matter. I just find working in these square glass containers, it's a lot easier. So I'm going to just kind of put it in here. That's one. And I'm going to use this one. This is two. It will stick to your hand a bit. That's fine. So you have 2 containers with your dough, and that's going to rest. Okay, stretch and fold. What we're going to do is keep the dough in the bowl, and you basically go from the sides, and I like using my spray bottle to prevent my hands from sticking, just to moisten my hands. And I'm going to pick up from the side, and I'm just going to let the dough stretch onto itself. I'm going to turn it, stretch onto itself, turn, and stretch onto itself. So they're like half folds. You just do that 4 times. So you notice that as I pull the dough up, it's folding onto itself. And I do that on each 4 sides of the container. That will then rest for 45 minutes. I do this 3 times. So it's stretch and fold, rest for 45 minutes, stretch and fold, rest for 45 minutes, another stretch and fold, and rest for 45 minutes. Okay, the next step is shaping the dough. This process happens before we go into the proof stage, which the proofing happens overnight. So just to kind of recap, what we've been doing is pulling and folding, stretching and folding 3 times with 45-minute rests in between. And now we're ready to shape our loaves. So just with using a little bit of flour, I'm just going to sprinkle very little flour on top. Have it come outside of the pan by itself. It just releases by itself. I'm going to add a little more flour to this, just to prevent it from sticking. And we're going to shape our loaf. Okay, that's fine. So what you're going to do is you're going to sort of pull it under, trying to create tension on the top surface. It may be a little sticky. Okay, just to kind of shape it into a loaf type of shape. And we're going to use a glass bowl with a clean kitchen towel. You can also use what's called Laminating. It's a bamboo bowl. These are made specifically for proofing and shaping loaves of bread. If you don't have one of these, a glass bowl is fine, as long as it's lined with a dish towel that's clean. So we're going to put our towel inside the bowl. And this works just as well, by the way. And we're going to make sure that we flour the towel, because we don't want the dough to stick. Liberally flour the towel. Then we're going to turn our dough into the bowl. Just like that. And we're going to cover it. And then this goes into the refrigerator, and it will proof overnight between 12 and 16 hours. Okay, so it's been about 12 to 16 hours since our dough has been in the refrigerator, proofing overnight. I'm going to unwrap it and take a look at it. And it's become a little stiffer, as you can see. So the next step is going to be basically baking it. So I'm using a cookie tray lined with parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, that's fine. You could just use flour, or if you have cornmeal, that works also. This is actually some cornmeal. I think it's cornmeal or semolina flour, and you could just sprinkle it lightly onto your tray, just so that it doesn't stick. Or you could just use the parchment paper with the same, with a little cornmeal or flour. What I'm going to do first is before I turn this over onto my cookie tray, I'm going to sprinkle it also with a little cornmeal. Okay, and then with the towel, I'm just going to turn it onto the sheet. And hopefully it didn't stick. Cool. It's funny, it has some of the impression of the towel. Okay, still cold. What we're going to do next, and this is really important, is we're going to slice the bread. So you can use a very sharp knife. I'm using actually a razor. This is a clean razor blade. Sharp knives work also. And we're going to cut into the dough. You can make your own design. I like just keeping it simple. And what this does, it allows the moisture to release. If you don't cut the dough, what'll happen is the air is going to try to escape and it'll disform the loaf. So this creates some interesting designs. When you see when the bread is baked, it creates like an interesting pattern. Okay. In the meantime, I should add, the oven has been preheating at 550 for an hour. It's really important that you keep the oven super hot. So it's 550 degrees for 1 hour. So that's one loaf. I'm going to try the next loaf. This one I'm going to do on the parchment paper. This is the second loaf that I had proofing in the Laminating. And I'm going to just turn this out. Hopefully, if it sticks a little, you could just kind of gently help it release from the side. But if it's floured enough, it shouldn't stick, okay? And I'm gonna spray it with water. And what I'm gonna do is add some sesame seeds. These are just regular store-bought sesame seeds, not toasted. And I'm gonna sprinkle the sesame seeds. And then I take my razor and I cut into, it's best if you have something really sharp where you don't have to actually dig too much into it. But okay, so now it's ready to be put into the oven. So the oven has been preheated for 1 hour at 550 degrees. Notice there's a baking pan, a cake pan on the bottom shelf, top shelf. I put the bread. And before I close the oven, I'm going to pour some water into the pan. And this creates steam, which is really, really important when baking the bread. Close the oven door, and it bakes for 20 minutes on 550 degrees. Okay, the bread has been baking in the oven at 550 degrees for about 20 minutes. I then lowered the temperature to 450 degrees and baked it for another 20 minutes. That time has ended, and now I'm going to completely shut off the oven, allowing the oven to cool along with the bread inside. While doing so, I'm going to open the door of the oven slightly and prop it open either with a wooden spoon or a metal tong like that, just to let the air escape. And I'm going to let that sit for about an hour. The moment of truth. The oven has cooled, the bread has cooled, it's been about an hour, and this is what we have. I pulled out both loaves. The pan's a little warm, but if you could see, this is the final product. The way you know that it's cooked, if you thump the bottom of it, you hear like a hollow sound to it. I would let it cool for several hours further before cutting into it. I don't know if you're going to be able to wait that long. Okay, we are now going to cut into our bread. Using a serrated knife, make sure it's serrated. It's a bread knife. It has these jagged teeth. They're pretty sharp. You don't want to use a regular knife because it's going to like sort of crush the bread. This is sort of like more of a saw type of effect, and it's the right knife to use in cutting bread. So we're going to cut into this. I'm just going to cut right down the center. And you can hear the crust is very, very crispy. I'm going to just open it up, and look how beautiful that is. Okay, flour, water, and salt. That's basically it. You can still see it's warm, it's smoky. It's a little on the moist side. This is what I was referring to earlier, these holes, known as the open crumb. Perfect loaf of bread. Let's check out this one with the sesame seed. And into this. Beautiful. Absolutely incredible. Try half a piece. I guarantee you, your family is going to beg you to make more of this bread. I'm going to give it a shot. It's great with butter, it's great with olive oil, salt and pepper, or it's just great on its own. It's still warm. It's amazing. It's amazing that the sourdough starter is a little bit of a tart, sour taste, but it's incredible. So there you have it, the long, tedious, step-by-step process of making sourdough bread, but it's definitely worth the effort. So I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. And don't forget to click the like button. And I'll see you next time.